Today we'll be talking about Afrocentric architecture, and this is informed by the fact that when you look at the African landscape, a lot of the architectural edifices we see are not reflecting our culture and our lifestyle as Africans. So we're talking about that today. But of course, architect Lape Odekunle Saleh is a registered architect and designer with over 15 years of experience in the construction industry. And since 2012, she has been the principal partner at Habitat and Living Design Limited, which is a multidisciplinary design and build firm that is based in Abuja with projects working with organizations such as Makato Foundation, RAPA, ATV, AEDC, and Centenary City, among so many others. So she's also a founder of AD Connect, which is a forum and workshop for architects and designers in business, which has run successful for over 5 years. And she has held various positions in professional associations such as um, NIA. So she has worked in the committee of Nigerian Institute of Architects and also a pioneer chair of IDA and Abuja chapter, which is passionate about innovation in the field of architecture, specializing in Afrocentric, sustainable, and beam-focused solutions and applications in design and construction of buildings. So this has culminated in the building of Greenhouse, which is the first Afrocentric sustainable commercial building of note in Abuja. So she's currently undertaking a PhD at Ahmad Bello University, Zaria, with the topic Applications of BIM to improve sustainability in indigenous architecture. So it's great to have you in the house today. How are you doing?
Fine, thank you. Very, very, very happy to be here. I was so excited about this. I'm very, very excited to talk about Afrocentrism in architecture. It's obviously something that's very dear to my heart, and this is basically what I practice.
Yes. So to get started, I would like you to tell us a bit about your work at HNL and 3D Studio, which you've been the managing director for some years now. So you can tell us about your role and some projects you've worked on for the past few years.
Okay, yes. Well, 3D Studio, Habitat and Living Design, is one and same company. You just have different functions within our space. So, we've been practicing architecture, interior design, and landscaping for, like I said, almost about, well, I guess the company has been in practice for about 15 years, but in actual, as a partnership, as a multidisciplinary firm, that's been for about 6 years now, 6 to 7 years. And so we've done that successfully for those years. And we've done, residential, commercial, corporate, interior, landscaping, architecture. We've had quite a myriad number of projects in those different areas.
So that's great to hear. Okay, so I will get started with the various questions. The first thing I want to ask is how would you explain Afrocentric architecture to a layperson, relating it to sustainability in contemporary African architecture? Today we have Afrocentric architecture, but some people are not so clear of what exactly it is. And then you can also use some projects to elaborate on that as well.
Well, I actually love I love the term Afrocentric architecture. I actually prefer it to local architecture or even vernacular architecture, although vernacular is very close as well. The thing about Afrocentric is that it has to do with the African as is. It's not doesn't mean we're going back to the past. It means that we're talking about what's an African right now, what does an African need, what does an African want in their buildings or their spaces, and we should design to fit that. So Afrocentrism in architecture to me is the it's the way for Africans to be truly sustainable. You can't say you are practicing sustainability or energy efficiency and you're not being Afrocentric. You must design for where you are and for who your clients or your occupants are. So that is what Afrocentrism means. It means that yes, we may look at symbolic things from the past. We may look at local materials used in the past or in the history of technology or building technology in Africa. But that doesn't mean that it's tied to that time or that we're trying to go back in time. It just means that we're able to use that, our history, our culture, our environment, past, current, future environment, and we're designing for that. We're designing for Africans in Africa now.
Okay, yes, perhaps we can also use some projects to elaborate more on some great works of Afrocentric architecture across Africa.
Yeah. Yes, of course. Some of my favorite architects are Francis Carey. We have David Ajayi doing things very well on the international level, bringing Afrocentric architecture to the international stage. Francis Carey is doing a wonderful job. His projects are a perfect example of everything that you want to see, meeting the needs of the Africans that he's designing for in very in areas that are really needed, schools, marketplaces. And then not only doing that, but also he includes the community as part of they are co-designers. They're not, and they're and constructors. They're not on the sideline. So one of the things that we are finding difficult when it comes to Afrocentric architecture and also sustainability in Africa is that it's usually important. It's usually an NGO that is supporting. It's usually students, foreign students on leave that come to Nigeria or Africa to do these small, very cute projects and things like that. And we are saying that African architecture should be by Africans, you know. And so one of the things that I love about Francis Carey's work is that he actually involves the community. And I think for us in Africa, if we want our architecture to be considered sustainable, we must combine or must collaborate with the community that we are designing for, or that we are building for, or that are part of, or where it's even maybe the location of the project. So Francis Carey is a constant and continuous inspiration to me. Like I said, David Ajayi is doing it on an international level, which is just impressive. And he's making it, attractive and acceptable, because a lot of people saw African architecture as backward, and he's been able to break that boundary. Here in Nigeria, we have PwC's Adeyemo Shokumbi, I think, and he's doing some wonderful work as well. And what I like about his work, in the same vein, is that it meets the need of that particular project or that client, but he always tries to make it relevant in an African sense. And that's really, really impressive and quite actually hard to achieve. His latest project, I think, that I've seen on this is a mosque in Ibadan, which is done, so beautifully, and in such using natural local materials, methodologies, and things like that. Another architect that I think I have seen, but in the interior design space, I would say Tola Akerele, or by design by Tola, does wonderful work, Afrocentric interiors that use natural elements, textures, things like that. And she always uses local artisans as well. So her work is also quite impressive. And then, of course, I'll talk about our own building, Greenhouse. Greenhouse itself is a recent project, and we had to self-fund it because we believed that it was not enough to talk about these things, and we're tired of looking at Francis Carey and saying, when will I get to do that? We're tired of waiting for a client to see the value in Afrocentric or sustainable architecture, and so we decided to do it ourselves. And right now, it's currently the only building I'm aware of in Abuja that is built sustainably, green, local materials, and is a commercial project as well.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the there are a lot of projects you've mentioned, and of course, I'm sure that anyone that goes through those projects will have a feel of what Afrocentric architecture is all about. So, also the next question I have is, there is this low usage of local materials in building design and construction in Nigeria. Using Nigeria as an example, and I mean personally, I can attribute this to a general perception of local materials being perceived as low quality, and also perhaps some low level of research in the industry. So, from your experience, can you enlighten us on some local sustainable materials and products that I can find in Nigeria today?
Yes, so we do have a lot of local materials. However, a lot of them are still in low technology state. So usually, what happens with the evolution of materials or the evolution of technologies in construction is that you start from somewhere very rudimentary. You start from adobe blocks, you start from timber, but then these things are now engineered so that they go beyond their basic capabilities, and you enhance the properties so that they can be used for even more, especially to meet modern requirements. And so, what we have when we talk about local materials, we talk about, clay, we talk about mud, we talk about thatch. But like I said, a lot of them are still in low technology state. Now, we have a lot of research in universities and in a National Building and Road Research Institute, where you see individuals have come up with ways of adapting these materials, applying technology them to improve their capabilities, so that they can meet modern day requirements of building. But unfortunately, this has stayed in the academic space, and that's one of the issues that we have. Um, when that can be transferred effectively to the market, I think then we can really talk about local materials and the use of local materials in Nigeria. So we have the basic things, but another thing that you have to consider is that when you talk about local, you also have to think about readily available. Readily available to us is cement, is concrete, timber, yes, maybe not engineered the way we would like, but we still have timber. So you also using a material that's readily available, but if that material now has a high carbon footprint, you may want to use less of it. So you design in a way that you can use less of those materials that are readily available, but may not necessarily be climate friendly or eco friendly. That's another way of being sustainable. That's another way of doing local. So being sustainable is different from being green or talking about energy efficiency in a very strict sense, because being sustainable also means that you're talking about cost. You must be able to be socioeconomically, the project must be socioeconomically viable. It must be able to it must be affordable. It must be something that the cost is not too high. And so us saying we use concrete or cement, it just means that you have to use it in a way that you use less, whether that is through design, whether that is through technology, for example, using additives that allows you to use less concrete, whether that is using something like polystyrene so that you're using less reinforcement, the weight of the building is lighter, so it means that it carries less load, and therefore you can use less concrete in the process of doing it, and all the other things. So when I talk about local materials, I'll talk about those historical materials that have not necessarily been adopted, and then those materials that are readily available, like cement and concrete. And another thing concerning local materials, again, is that you can also use it in a symbolic manner. You may not be able to use it to carry the structure of the building because of, like I said, the modern day requirements for buildings and the activities that go on in those kinds of buildings, but you may be able to use them in a decorative manner or as substitutes. For example, in greenhouse, what we did for our balustrades, instead of using the regular metal balustrades or stainless steel imported from China, we used compressed earth bricks, and we made these bricks on site. We got the machines, we rented the machines for a very reasonable price from MBRRI, that's National Building and Road Research Institute. It's available to anyone who comes and applies. And we literally selected the soil, got our laborers, and produced everything on site. So all the balustrades in greenhouse, for example, on the exterior, we use compressed earth bricks. Now, another major impediment to using local materials also, it's knowledge. Because, for example, if you want to use compressed earth bricks in your building, you have to calculate the load. The load is actually different from your regular sandcrete block, because on one to one they may be the same. They actually might be the same weight, or or it may be a little bit less, but the size of it is much smaller than your regular sandcrete block, which means you need to use a lot more than you would use with a sandcrete block, which means that you need a building that can a structural design that can carry that load, and it has to be calculated from the beginning. So retrofits are quite difficult with local materials. You have to design with them in mind. If you decide you want to use adobe or clay or limestone finishing on your walls, you have to make sure that you have gotten the right mix from the beginning. It's not something that can be applied afterwards. It can be, but with a lot of difficulty. So these are the issues we have with local materials. They are readily available, but in the low state of technology, since we do not have a value chain that has developed a market in the use of local materials, it's very difficult to apply it. And so you find these individual projects like ours, like the mosque that we spoke about, where architects and designers have to go out of their way to develop these materials for use, to experiment. There's a lot of experimentation. Experiment with these materials because there's no existing literature, and we don't have these materials input into our software automatically that we can just quickly do a calculation on your system and say, okay, I'm using Adobe blocks, what does that mean, let me design my building like that. So those are the issues that we have with the use of local materials in Nigeria.
Okay, yeah, that's quite understandable. That means as a continent or as a country, we still need there's still a need for a high level of industrialization to be able to, create a lot of products from these local materials in such a way that more people can use it on their projects more readily. And also, like you mentioned, a lot of the research that is ongoing also needs to be transferred to the industry so that it doesn't end up as just a research work that was done in an institute.
Yes.
So yeah, yeah, so that's quite understandable. So the next question I have is that, in my opinion, sustainability in designs of spaces only get to prove itself during usage. So during the operations and maintenance phase, that's when sustainability can actually get to prove itself. So there are both natural and technology-driven approaches currently to making buildings and spaces more humane and sustainable. So can you
Yes, of
enlighten us
course.
on some natural ways to infuse sustainability into our spaces? So that we can rely less on perhaps on green tech and some of these heavy technologies. So natural ways we can infuse sustainability into our designs and spaces.
So yes, we have passive and active techniques to make buildings more sustainable. Uh, the uh, the passive techniques are designed usually from the design stage, from the conceptual stage actually, right from the beginning. You can decide, okay, I want my building to face this direction based on the site analysis. If I face it in this direction, I'm able to optimize sunlight or minimize sunlight depending on the requirements. I am able to design rooms in such a way that they are naturally protected, from certain elements, whether that is sunlight or rain and all that. And the thing about it is that in Africa, one of our major issues when it comes to making homes and buildings comfortable is heating. Whereas in the northern hemisphere, it's the opposite, where their issue is the cooling, or rather, sorry, the opposite. Sorry, heat is our problem, but cooling is our issue. While for there, cold is their problem and heating is their issue. So they are finding ways of heating buildings, conserving heat, and reducing, energy expended towards the, controlling those kinds of temperatures towards the warmer side. Whereas in our own side, we have basically ACs for cooling and maintaining those cool temperatures, comfortable temperatures for human beings to live in and take out their activities. And so, those things, if you can reduce the use of those things from the beginning through the orientation of your building to a clear calculation of your fenestration, your windows, your placement of your windows, and then even meeting certain modern desires of most clients. A lot of clients are very interested in having a lot of glazing, a lot of glass, cutting walls that start from the floor and go all the way to the ceiling. And these things are exposed to sunlight, and for us that we have such a high level of sunlight, you're talking about a lot of heat coming into the building through this glass, through this glazing. And so if you can find a way of screening off those those areas from the beginning, from direct sunlight, you've already mitigated half of the effect of the heating. Another issue that comes from there is when you talk about energy efficiency, where you now say, okay, I have this large, area that is glazed. So I would have to use double glazing, reinforced tempered glass with a vacuum in the middle filled with argon. This is completely, an imported element that you're bringing into the building. And so having to deal with that is not, I'm not going to say it's not going to be necessary depending on the kind of building, but the point is that if you are designing in an Afrocentric manner, which means you're in Africa, you have this level of sunlight, you have this heating problem, you're trying to reduce the life cycle costs of the building, then you would automatically design in a way that you have prevented the glass from even getting the heat, being hit by the heat source in the first place.
Okay, so I'll just jump to the last question, which is basically talking about certification. So currently, there are very few certification on sustainability coming from Africa. I mean, they're actually tailored towards the African context. The likes of LEED and EDGE. So how do you think we can match up with global standards as regards sustainable designs and certifications in Africa?
So as you know, there are different types of certification. around the world for that recognize or certify sustainability or sustainable buildings or sustainable principles that have been applied. I think in North America it's more of LEED. In the UK it's BREEAM, and South Africa is Green Star. Those are the ones that at least people have heard of, you know. And then obviously a lot is also certified by the World Green Building Council. So the issue that we have here is that we don't have any
Yes.
homegrown criteria. And the problem with that is that you can't really call something sustainable without taking into consideration, you know, the local, also the challenges being faced by the local population. And so when we have these imported concepts, principles, and requirements placed upon us, we don't really meet up. It's very, very difficult for you to build sustainably in this part of the world. But aside from that, we actually do have a problem with the fact that we don't have regulation. When we talk about those organizations that are supplying that certification, they're not actually government bodies in their countries, but they have been able to pass policies and laws which the government now regulates and enforces. So without government buy-in into sustainable principles, green building, Afrocentrism, it's going to be very difficult for us to do any kind of to do any kind of certification for green buildings or for Afrocentric architecture. Now, the issue is this: if you do not have any kind of certification, any kind of reward, or any kind of system that rewards or punishes architecture that is not climate friendly or eco friendly, then there's no incentive. There's no incentive for the individual, there's no incentive for the corporation, there's no incentive for real estate developers to say they want to build green or build sustainably, unless, I mean, obviously, if with their knowledge and understanding they understand that this actually is beneficial to them as well to build like that. So we need the government's buy-in. We do need regulation. For other countries right now, what they do is that they reward those buildings that are able to reach certain lead standards, whether it's silver or gold. You get tax write-offs, you get all sorts of awards and recognition and all that. On the other side of it, even if you're not getting an award, you are able to meet certain criteria in order to get jobs with the government. So if you are building sustainably, you are building climate friendly, you're actually giving consideration when they're awarding jobs. Another thing is that they, especially like in the UK now, as long as it's a public building, it must meet certain green building standards. It has become a law. Whereas for here, our public buildings, I mean, I would say that they even sometimes, defy the laws of architecture or aesthetics in architecture, talk more of, green building or sustainability. So, in fact, one of the things that I think we are hoping to do eventually at some point in AD Connect, and I know Madely of CPDI Africa has also talked about this a lot, is to say that once a building is going to be a landmark, once it's a building of a certain capacity, once it's a building of a certain how do you put it? It's going to be a public building of a certain mass and size. That building should not be done without Afrocentrism as part of it. There must be something African about a building that is public for Africans. I should be able
Yes.
to see this building and identify it upfront that this building is probably located in Africa, even without having visited it or even knowing anything about it. So we need the government's buy-in. We need the government's buy-in when it comes to sustainability, green architecture, and also Afrocentric architecture. I find it very difficult right now to name a single building, single public building, single government building right now that actually you can call Afrocentric. And that's something that is quite shameful. I'm sure if I rack my brain, I might be able to remember one, but as of now, I don't remember a Nigerian public building that can be considered Afrocentric.
So many of the public buildings we have, if you take some of the museums and some of the stadiums you have in Nigeria, it's just some of them are even replica of foreign projects and that exist in some other parts of the
Very
world.
true.
So obviously, is there's a necessity for our public buildings to be able to presents,
Very
identify
true.
where it comes from.
Yeah.
Before we actually round up, I normally ask some of these random questions. So I'll just ask you two random questions before we leave. So the first question I have is, what's the last book that you read that struck a chord with you?
Because the last book I read that of notes that I'm really
That
I'm
you
still reading, actually, to be honest with you.
really identify
It's
deeply
called
with?
Predictably Irrational by by Dan Ariely or Ariely. I don't know how to pronounce it exactly. And basically talks about the fact that human beings are actually a lot more unpredictable. No, sorry, they are predictable in their unpredictability. They are predictable in making irrational decisions more times than they make rational decisions. And so it's a very interesting book. It talks, they do a lot of experiments on people and they test a lot of theories, and it's just interesting. And what I like about it really is the fact that if you apply it to business psychology, dealing with clients, especially in our business, you will find that there's a lot of behavior that you don't really understand, especially when we're talking about the Nigerian clients in architecture, that maybe can actually be explained actually are just simple human psychology. And so that's a book I'm really enjoying right now.
Wow, okay, that's great. I believe as architects, is very important to be able to know how to handle our clients and understand that people are not predictable in a lot of ways. So
Yes.
that's okay. So the last question I have is, what's your favorite architectural movement or style? We've talked a whole lot about Afrocentrism, but perhaps you might also have some other favorite architectural movement or style.
Yes, for me it's deconstructivism and organic architecture. And they're equal in my mind because organic architecture for me is just part of how I practice or how I even came to architecture. And it's, to me,
Yeah.
Afrocentrism, it's in itself is organic architecture. Organic architecture can be applied, in so many different ways. And I think even the process of design is an organic process. So organic architecture
Yes.
is very dear to me. But I love the constructivism because of the breaking of the rules, and the idea that architecture is not just one thing and it's not rudimentary. It means that it can be more than just providing shelter. It can be more than just providing a space as to meet requirements. You can experiment, you can break the rules and make them again. But like I've said before, even in breaking the rules is actually creating a new set of rules. So the rule is break all the rules, but it's still a rule. So, and that's why it's interesting to me, and I think it inspired a lot of architecture that we see today. It created the platform for people to see architecture beyond just the basic. A lot of people, I would even say it's almost like the rise of star architects came from deconstructivism, when people were able to break those boundaries and break those laws of physics for everybody to see and admire, and be awed by those great works of architecture. And I think deconstructivism remains very, very dear to my heart.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Those are two great movements. I'm sure that organic architecture is something that cuts across every architectural movement, because, like you mentioned, design itself is an organic process.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's great to hear. Someone is actually asking a question. See, how can the challenges of access to data on the topic be made more readily available to government, regulatory bodies, and private sector?
Yes, so the government bodies have access to it. In fact, they're the repository, actually. If you see raw materials and research building council, everything is there. If you ever go to any of these expos, you'll see their stand, you'll see bamboo floors, you'll see compressed earth bricks. It is all there, it's available. However, it is transferring it from academic, knowledge to actual use to application.
Industry.
That's the problem we're having. So it has to do with policy making. If the right people or the right bodies, so this is where our associations actually come in. Nigerian Institute of Architects, Interior Association of Nigeria, Green Building Council, all these associations that have been able to get power through people, you know, can actually push for policies to be passed in that area. And if once a policy is passed, it needs to be implemented. How can it be implemented? By, going back into the archives now, looking for this information and now applying it. But it is all there. National Building and Research Institute, like I said, they have libraries full of research. They have these things on ground. We just need to take it into actual practice and actual application.
Yeah, I'm sure that the NIBRI, they normally organize programs. So it's for us a part of that discussion that they normally, I know that they have events from time to time. So part of the discussions will always maybe center around how to take these things beyond presenting papers and all that, and begin to translate it to industry products that can actually so that it doesn't just end on papers, and
Yeah,
begin to
yeah,
reflect on our projects. Okay, I think that's the only question that we have for today. So
thank you very much, Onyema.
yes, ma'am, you are most
And
welcome.
thank you to
Thank you
those people
for
that struggled to come in.
yeah, it obviously it's beyond everybody's power. It's something that nobody had control over today. All right, ma'am, so thank you for your time and thanks
Thank
for your
you. Thank you. Have a great weekend.
yeah, you too.